Final Hour Overdrive continues, powered by FanDuel, bringing you everything from the opening line to the final score. Bryan Hayes, the O-Dog, Jeff O'Neill, Jamie Noodles McLennan, now up on TSN2. Chris Johnston, our TSN Hockey Insider, here in a moment. Best bets later in the hour. Raptors coming off a win last night. See, Luka looked pretty good for the Lakers last night, too. Luka looked pretty good. And the Mavs are in L.A. tomorrow night. That is going to be a circus when Dallas rolls through there tomorrow night.
Does L.A. go to Dallas again this year?
I believe in March they're in there. I'm pretty sure that's the case.
That'll be a bigger circus, him going home.
I need to be there, man. If that's a Sunday afternoon, I'll think about it.
It's going to be crazy because he had himself a night last night. Like, Luka looked good, and LeBron's playing well. They beat up on Denver. Last night. And they're legit. Can they defend? That's the question. Where's Luka's head's at? Is he into it? Is he not? We talked about Rantanen last hour. It's tough, man. You get your world flipped upside down and you didn't see it coming. That's a shock to the system.
Well, you don't think that Rantanen's agent would have told him, hey, this is unlikely, but this could happen? Like, if you want to play this game, this could happen.
I guess
crazy to think that it wouldn't happen.
But I think you got so much ego that you think they're not trading me. Like, I'm Mikko Rantanen. I'm Luka Doncic. Like, no chance they're trading me.
Dude, you start screwing around with Joe Sakic and Steve Yzerman and these guys, they don't care, man. They do not care.
I guess.
Well,
you've got Harrison, the same thing in Dallas.
Thing is, you've got to – this is where you come back to the Vegas model. You've got to do what's best for your organization. And – yes, there's feelings and relationships involved, but this is, in the end, it's a business. So as much as we want to talk about, hey, Mitch Marner's a homegrown guy, all of that, like, if Brad Treliving wants him in the organization for the next 8 years, they're going to do everything they can. If Mitch Marner wants to test the market, or Vladdy, or you name it, it is pretty interesting, I would say. That Vladdy and Mitch Marner are both not locked in. Like, those are two marquee, massive names in this market that there could be change coming.
Big time.
Two players to the caliber, Jamie, and these players don't get to this position. They're always locked up long term.
Yeah, but
generally speaking, you can throw Bichette in there too. Bo's not signed either. In terms of the kind of faces of the Toronto sports scene for the last.
You actually think that guy has
years?
any motivation to sign a long-term contract with the Blue Jays as of right now? They talked about how they want to be together. The team's not going to win. If they do, it's not going to be a lot. What motivation would he have to re-sign as a Blue Jay? There's zero.
I can give you a motivation.
Money?
What if I lost it and they're actually willing to pay me before I've lost? What if I'm Matthew Wolf? Because Bichette, he had a terrible year last year, man. Terrible season, and he doubles down on that. He's not getting some monster contract. Like, if he has Bo Bichette, and this probably applies to every athlete, regardless of how great you are. If you are 2 years away from being completely perceived completely differently, 2 years away.
Yeah. And you double down on one bad season, you're regarded as just a guy.
Exactly, and listen, I'm sure he's uber confident. I know he had injury problems last year. I'd be willing to bet on him, Bichette, but he's a year away from – there's not that great of a market out there, man. Like, no one knows who you are anymore. Are you a hitter? Are you not? Can you play short? So that would be the motivation, is if the Jays say, we're throwing out last year, we don't care. Here's, an 8-year deal, $250 million.
You think the Jays would do that after the year that he just had?
I don't know.
Would be insane, dude.
The problem they had with Vladdy is they weren't proactive. That's why they're in the position they're in right now.
I think, getting to your comment, if they believe in him, okay, so they know they've been behind the curtain with this guy. If they believe that last season was just an outlier, then you are trying to sign him and trying to get him off of a bad deal.
Guys, if they believed in these two guys, they would have been signed. That's the difference.
Possibly.
They don't believe in them, and they don't think that these are two cornerstone pieces that you can build around, or they would be signed.
Yeah,
probably true. Their actions would suggest that. Now, Shapiro and Atkins, do they deserve the benefit of the doubt, though, that they can read the tea leaves? What have they done to make you feel like they know what they're doing in terms of winning? Not a lot lately. You know, like they'll tell you everything. They'll break it down to you and tell you exactly what they're thinking or why they're right, why you're wrong. The fact is they haven't built a winning program here. So I think you're right in terms of the way they feel about things. It doesn't mean that that's the way it should be. But nevertheless, I mean, Marner, Guerrero, Bichette, Cornerstone, you thought 10, 15 years of those guys, and I don't know how many will be around this time next year. Here's Chris Johnston, our TSN hockey insider. CJ, in terms of Marner, how would you handicap the likelihood that something happens with the Leafs before June 30th?
Ooh. It's a tough one. I think a lot will hinge, obviously, on what happens between now and June 30th, how the playoffs look, how they feel. I don't think one thing that hasn't changed is I do believe the Leafs want to sign Mitch Marner. I've got no reason to believe that Marner wants to leave, but you kind of are at this cross-section where, we have the salary cap going up. I mean, this is a time of opportunity for players, and making all that come together where both sides see the same way is probably a little more complex now than even it might have been had this been the scenario the last couple of years. So, I don't think that there's certainly nothing to suggest that they're not going to be together, but the fact that we're getting closer and closer, to the time when Marner can be a free agent, I mean, you can't ignore that possibility. And so, if this ends up being a really successful playoff run, if Mitch plays well, I think that the conditions might be there for the Leafs to, open the books even wider, open the wall a little more to try to, compel him to stay. But, as it stands right now, I think that they're comfortable kind of, just feeling their way through this because, they can still offer an 8th year, which other teams can't. And, this is the only place that Mitch is from. Obviously he's got big ties to the organization. So I think there's still a path here for them to make a deal, but it won't necessarily come in the next, week or 10 days before the trade deadline. It might wait till after the last game's played this season.
So, CJ, do you not think that the Mikko Rantanen situation, I know they seem completely different, but these are top-tier players. Rantanen's been traded. Now there's rumblings that maybe Carolina would be open to something different if they can't get it long-term. Would there be any type of domino effect, or is it just two separate players, two separate organizations, two separate situations based on, no move clauses, all of that?
No, I think if Rantanen were to sign, just for argument's sake, let's say he takes a big deal in Carolina and there's another number up on the board, I think that would, to some degree, just be more ammo potentially for the Marner camp. I mean, it depends where that number ends up. I mean, you've had Leon Draisaitl, sign a deal that surpassed the previous high, that Matthews' deal that kicks in next season. So that's one up there. I mean, really, let's face it, player contracts are trending in an upward direction, especially if your guys at the top of the league. But where that lands Marner is tough to say. Is he at $12 million? Is he $12.5? Is he, exceeding what Matthews makes? I mean, I think it's in those details where there hasn't been an agreement struck just yet. And so, the more the marketplace takes shape, I think that could certainly influence, how those contract negotiations go. And so it's not as if by any means am I suggesting that Marner is waiting for Rantanen or the other way around. But, if you were to get one or both of those players signing, it just gives you a little bit more of a guideline about the trend around the league and basically what Marner can ask for in the open market.
Do you know what Marner's priority would be? Would it be, what would be more important, remaining a Maple Leaf or being the highest paid player on the roster?
Well, I don't know that he set that as a parameter. I think, like any player, he wants to be paid fairly, and fair in this case is probably up for negotiation, right? There's some subjectivity to that because obviously he's signing at a time when we know the salary cap's due to blow past $100 million within the life of his next deal. And so, I do believe Mitch wants to be Maple Leaf. He said that repeatedly. I don't think anything has changed, even though obviously the business side of the sport right now is maybe creeping into his mind a little bit. I mean, it hasn't impacted his performance on the ice. Right among the league's leading scorers this year, fresh off that, pretty memorable final game for Canada at the Four Nations. So, it's everything I'm seeing from him is he wants to be a Leaf. He's doing his part by performing and leaving everything to, his agent and to the Leafs to figure out where that number lands. But I don't think he's drawing any hard lines in the sand and says it has to be above this player or this number, at least not that I'm aware of. And so, we'll see how this goes. I still think, I believe, of course, if he's willing to go this long and he's comfortable and he's still performing, there's nothing to suggest that this won't go into, the off season for the Leafs. But, ultimately the Leafs can offer him more money in the total package if they give him an 8th year, which, I would expect they would. So, there's still some negotiating to be done, and perhaps in this case, the best place to do that is once the final game is played this season.
So, CJ, explain this Rantanen transaction for me, because the only way I'm pulling the trigger on that move is if I've had conversations with the agent and I know he's going to sign. Like, you bring a guy in there who you shock the hell out of him that he moved from Colorado, and then you just toss it out, hey, we got this deal for you, what do you think? And what if he's just like, I don't think so. Like, what on earth are they doing with him?
Well, I do know for sure that they didn't make the deal with the agent knowing ahead of time, or Mikko Rantanen knowing ahead of time. Obviously, it happened a month ago, and here we are in this moment now. I mean, then
So let me ask you: do you not think that that's bizarro world?
It's unusual for how teams operate, and I think Carolina is still banking on the fact that he might want to stay there. I mean, it's such a weird time though. He's played 7 games with the Hurricanes. He spent almost as much time with the Hurricanes physically since the trade as he did with Finland at the Four Nations. It's a hard situation with any city, any team. Like, this isn't disparaging what they got going on in Carolina, because that team's been, a really strong team for a long time now. But it's hard to make that kind of big life decision so quickly. And so we'll see how this all shakes out. I don't think they have to have his signature on a contract by March 7th in order to keep him. But I suppose if he were to come to them and say, there's no way whatsoever I'm signing with the Hurricanes an extension, I mean, then they'd be left in a really interesting spot before the trade deadline. But yeah, I mean, look, this was a different kind of move. It was a big swing. I don't know that necessarily just because it started off, a little uncertain here, where Rantanen hasn't put up the points yet, and obviously they're trying to have these contract discussions that haven't produced a new deal. It doesn't mean it's going to end poorly, but yeah, this is not the way business is normally done with teams and big players. I think that's what made the trade rather so shocking there on January 24th. And here we are a month later, and we're still processing the fallout. And I think the Hurricanes are still working their way through where things go next.
Well, if he becomes available, then I'm sure a lot of teams are going to call on him that are playoff bound.
What are they going to get back to say? You canceled out Rantanen, and you also canceled out HS and Drury walking out the door.
I don't know, but Carolina's paying him, $4.7 million or whatever it is. I think it was 50% retained.
They'll use that cap space to do it all over again this summer. I mean, to me, that's something was up with Natchez. Like, I think that relationship was strained anyways. Don't you think that was a pain in the ass? And
it seemed that way, but if they can eat Rantanen, if they eat half of Rantanen's deal, and he's like $2.5 million on the second train between now and March 7th. It'd be pretty fascinating. But in terms of, now that we've gotten through the Four Nations, like, we are rapidly approaching the trade deadline here. It seems as if everyone's just conceded that the Leafs, they got to have a third-line center, and you likely need some sort of help on the back end somewhere, whether it's depth or maybe 4 or 5 defensemen slotted in, so to speak. What is your understanding of how aggressive Trey Living's going to be, and do you think it's just a foregone conclusion that he'll certainly swing and swing pretty big?
Well, I do think that those are still the areas they've identified and are focused on. I mean, unless there's some kind of unexpected injury or something that forces them to change course in the next 10 days, I would think you're looking primarily at the Leafs getting that center and then, adding some kind of depth piece on the blue line. What they have to decide, and I don't think this decision has been made internally yet, is, are we going for a player that's on an expiring deal, a rental player, or, do we want to, if we're expending the assets, bring in someone who's under contract? And, that's where you get into the Scott Lautons or Braden Shens or, some guys around the league that their teams, I think, are willing to move them, even though they've got years left on their deal if you pony up. I mean, that's probably if they end up going one of those routes where they're bringing in a player that has some term left, that probably represents the bigger swing, I would think, because obviously when you're getting rental players, by and large, the cost isn't as high, the risk is less, because if it doesn't work out, the player is most likely walking away anyway in a few months' time, and so that's kind of what I got my eye on with the Leafs is which direction of those two they pivot. And it's crazy how quickly this has snuck up on us. As we sort of thought, nothing really happened during that Four Nations break when it came to NHL transactions, and all of a sudden, here we are on the other side of it, and there hasn't been a meaningful trade made since February 1st. At some point, there's going to be an explosion here, and the Leafs are going to be one of the teams wanting to be in the mix on figuring out, what they can land, and I don't think their objective that we've been talking about probably since November has changed in terms of the positional needs they have, and now it's about narrowing in and making a choice and ultimately consummating a deal or two.
Well, let's hope that all happens on March 7th, so we've got stuff to talk about. CJ, is there a team that you kind of have maybe circled or been trying to stay in touch with that may make some noise that we're not really focused on? You look at the bottom of the standings, and there's Seattle, there's Buffalo, there's Nashville, Chicago. Is Pittsburgh a team that everybody's in play, or, somebody else, the Islanders, the Blues? Where is there a surprise team or could be a surprise team that you think maybe will be all in or will be sellers?
Well, certainly the Penguins, I think it's been clear, are all out in a sense that other than the big guys that are going to have banners in the rafters there, that everyone else is kind of in play to some degree, depending on what you're willing to offer. But, they're obviously got a bit of a for sale sign hanging out there. The team I'm most curious about where it goes is Boston. We've seen Don Sweeney speak in the last 24 hours here about trying to keep Brad Marchand, but obviously, they kind of are waving the white flag on the season to some degree. Injuries are a big issue. Hampus Lindholm likely done for the year. Charlie McAvoy, not clear when he'll be back, but it doesn't seem like the expectation is it'll be anytime soon. And so, how deep do they want to cut in? It's one thing to trade a Trent Frederick, for example, who's a pending UFA, I think is basically gone other than finding out where he's going to. But are they willing to look at the Brandon Carlos? If things don't go the right way with Marchand in terms of the contract extension, would they consider moving him? I think that's a team that has some pretty nice pieces, depending on how much they're willing to sell. And so, I find them pretty interesting. But, it's crazy right now. There's 10 teams that are on the wrong side of the playoff line that are within 6 points of a wild card spot in the two conferences. And so, I think a lot of the teams in that group are a little undecided about which direction they're going to go, meaning if it's a 2 or 3 game winning streak and between now and next week, they might change what they're going to do. And so maybe that ends up making it a slower deadline. It's tough to say. But I still think there's a lot of business to be done because a lot of teams out there in a situation like the Leafs that are trying to win the Cup, are looking for upgrades, have the cap space, and are ready to make moves as soon as more sellers shake free.
Chris Johnston, and we all debated what the Four Nations would look like and what happens if there's injuries and the fallout. Well, now we're through it, and I'm curious what you're hearing around the league from, you referenced McAvoy, who's out long-term for the Bruins, and Matthew Tkachuk. Paul Maurice did a radio interview this morning in Florida, said he will play again this year. It's not a season-ending injury, but it may take some time. Brady Tkachuk didn't play the other day. What are you hearing in terms of the status of some of these players and the fact that it looks like the American team in particular got hit the hardest?
Yeah, it's a tough bounce. And then I think, look, there's a general understanding when you ask these guys to play at the level they played, that there's going to be some injuries most likely. Some of those situations are unique. The Bruins didn't come out and say it, but I can tell you that the truth is they had some concerns about the way McAvoy's situation was handled. He suffered his shoulder injury in their first game, took some kind of, freezing shot, played in the second game against Canada, developed an infection along the way. They're not happy with how that was all handled, at least with Matthew Tkachuk. Bill Zito was part of the USA management team. He's obviously his GM in Florida, so there was a complete visual, everyone that needed to be at the table making those decisions knew what was going on there. But, it's an unfortunate reality of having these tournaments. I want to see them keep doing it, but it's some owners obviously, it's tough. I mean, the feeling around Matthew Tkachuk is that, yeah, he might play again this season, as Paul Maurice said. I got no reason to doubt him there, but this is a significant injury, that it's one that, could keep him out for a meaningful amount of time. And, maybe that's okay for Florida because I think they're pretty safe when it comes to a playoff spot. But if he isn't in position to compete for them when the playoffs begin, I mean, you're certainly impacting their ability to try to make it to a third straight final. And so that's the delicate balance the league's always walking. When you're having these mid-season breaks, it seems like they're right now bending more towards doing them and living with the consequences. But I can say there will be consequences if when players go to the Olympics next year. I don't know who it's going to be, obviously, but someone's going to get injured, or a couple guys are going to be injured. I mean, that's just the history of these tournaments, and it shows how badly the players want to win, and it is going to have some impact potentially on these playoff races. I mean, Boston, they're in a really tough spot coming out of the break. They were touch and go to make it as it was. And, losing McAvoy potentially for, they're calling him week to week. If it's multiple weeks, I mean, maybe by mid-March they're out of it before he even has a chance to skate or play again.
I think it's an easy out for Boston to just say, look, Lindholm's out, McAvoy, it's just not our year. We've got to just do kind of a quick retool and maybe sell off some assets, try to sign some guys in the summer and go back at this. It's an easy out if they want to do it.
Right, and it seems like they're inclined to go that way. I mean, my sense is they're pretty realistic about where they're at. I mean, I don't know the exact number, but they were something like minus 25 goal differential. I mean, I know that they're right in the race, but it hasn't been their year from start to now. And, I think that with all the success they've had, you're right. It's easier there to retool than because the job, why can't they become like a Washington or some of these teams that have bounced back pretty quickly and are competitive after not having much of a lull?
Well, and when you compare that to, the three teams currently ahead of them, either in the wild card or pursuing it, Detroit, Ottawa, Columbus, the three of them are so desperate to make the playoffs. Like Ottawa hasn't been there in 6 or 7 years. Detroit, 6 or 7 years. And Columbus has kind of been in and out over time. But obviously, with everything, the tragedy of the summer and everything, the emotions hanging around that team and the fact that they're right there, I would assume the three of them, I mean, they're going to be going for it. And I don't think they'll get crazy. You're not going to trade first-round picks or anything, I don't think, just to get in. But what's coming from those teams and the players and the coaching staffs in terms of their dogged mentality. Detroit, Ottawa, Columbus. Like, they're going to go all out down the stretch here.
Yeah, and it's interesting. Columbus is a team we've had their players on trade bait list the whole year, and they just hung around. I mean, I could see a world where they flip and even add, again, like you're saying, within reason, but that they're adding something to their lineup versus subtracting because they've hung in it. And, the players that are there that have done that job probably deserve that.
Ooh.
Yeah, I think if you're Ottawa, you do have to. I would trade a first rounder for a guy who could make your team better now. They've got a young team. You look down the middle of the ice, they're 22, 23, 24. Like, a first rounder.
Would you do it for an expiring contract,
for a
rental, or is it got to be a guy?
I think it's somebody that, maybe a little term on there that is going to add to the depth of your group. Easier said than done, because who are those guys, right? Like, who are the guys that are going to help your group get over that hump? But I think when you're in that, as we talked about, the second layer of that Eastern Conference, and you've got an opportunity to do it, this could be a year. You've got to get over the hump. You've got a captain that came back and got a taste of what it's really like to play at a high level there. Like Brady, he was a man possessed. He wants to bring that back to the Senators. I think he got a first taste of like, hey, this is what playoff hockey could be like. Like, that hockey was pretty good. And to me, I think the Senators have to continue to try and add to that group. And, you kind of retooled. You're past the retool now. I think you've got to spend those assets if you have them, because it's, you're growing your farm. But yeah, great. But you've got to get to the next level.
They got to punch their ticket now. You played 57 games. You're there. You got to get in. You got to get in.
Can you imagine Brady Tkachuk in a Battle of Ontario? I mean, that would renew things, I think, pretty good if those teams played in the first round.
Oh, big time, man. Big time.
Fun.
That would be incredible theater.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I think we're all rooting for that. But you still got to get there. 25 games to go for the majority of these teams. All right, CJ, we'll leave it there. Thank you for this.
All right, guys. Have a good night.
Chris Johnston, our TSN Hockey Insider. Yeah, it's interesting. Like, the first round pick, now you can put protections on it, and I think if it's a guy with term, if I'm Ottawa, I'd definitely be open to doing that. If it's like a rental, if it doesn't have a protection, I don't know. I mean, I'd be nervous of doing that, but at the same time, like you said, they've been through this for years, and
7 years. So you've got to find
like
the last time they went to the conference final was 2017. So that's you got to find a way to push through. To me, they're going to do it methodically. They're not just going to be crazy. But they made some trades in the off season. They've added some players that they believe are going to get them there, but they've got to continue to push through. And if you're in that battle with Detroit and Boston and whoever else is in there, Columbus and that. You got to feel like you've got to come out on top, or at least try to.
For sure.
I've loved what they've been doing, their fight. I love what Greeny's brought to the table. Now they need the guy in net to step up. End of story.
Well, bottom line is, yes, you traded for him, you extended him. He has to be your one, and he has to play like it. Before the injury, he was 8-0-1. Since then, it's 0-3 now, 0-3
that
since
seems
he's
like
come back.
eons ago. It's like it's
March.
December.
It's December. Yeah, got to play better.
Yeah, Ullmark. That's the expectation, man. They've acquired him. He's worthy of the money when he plays well. I mean, he's capable of doing it. It's just a matter of putting it together.
Yeah, I love all these guys. Give me the money. I deserve the money. And then when they start playing like garbage, it's the media's fault. We're a bunch of dummies and a-holes.
Well, that's the Elias Pettersson move. Man. Like, Pettersson is the highest paid guy on the team. He's got an A on his jersey. He's their number. He's got to be their offense. They can't score. Like, Vancouver cannot generate offense. And this guy has the audacity, when asked about a question, in response to what his head coach said, he goes, well, what's really frustrating is dealing with the media. It's like, you got to be kidding me, man.
I am totally out on that guy. You guys know how much I've loved him in the past. I thought he was going to be snatching Hart trophies out of Connor McDavid's hands. I'm totally out. I can't stand it. I feel sorry for Vancouver. I'm so out on him. I like that comment that he just looks like a whiny little suck when he's talking. It's just like, puff your chest out and play like a man. Like, do you remember that guy in the bubble, how good he played in the playoffs?
Yeah.
He was a stud. A dominant player, physical, on the puck. It's completely gone, and now he's just a whiny baby. It's so embarrassing. I feel bad for him.
You know the Charlie Brown, the guy with the cloud over his head? I can't remember his name. It's a Pigpen or
Pigpen,
like
I think, yeah.
But like he skates around like that. You could see there's like his aura is off. Like his energy is off. Like I know that's a weird thing to say, but he's just. He's not the player that we saw 2 years ago.
Not
like
even
a year and a half. Like, that's not the player. Like, I watched them last night. I'm like, that is not the player. Now, Ray was right. He did. He was involved. Even here in Toronto, I thought he had a really good game in Toronto defensively. Was, in on plays and was battling. Like, he's a smart player. But he wasn't that force. And that's the biggest thing. Pettersson earned that contract because he was an absolute force to be reckoned with every time. Big shot, good vision, competed on pucks, skated, used his speed. None of that now is there for him. None of that.
Yeah, it's too bad. And yet again, Vancouver's still in a playoff spot. Like they're
1 point on Calgary right now.
Like they could make the playoffs.
See, what they have to calculate, guys, is how long does it go before the expectation that, what did you call him, Noodles? A difference maker or a force, you called him?
Yeah, a force.
What is the timeline on that just disappearing and not returning? That's what Vancouver has to look at. And they got to make a quick decision because maybe it's already that time. It's like he's never returning to going to be that player. They have to decide.
So we just talked about it with Bo Bichette. When you're at an elite level, it's probably 2 years. You're 2 years removed from what is with this guy. And maybe he's not the same guy, And the thing is with Vancouver, as of July 1st, his no movement clause kicks in. So that doesn't mean it's impossible to move off him in the future, but he's got to be in on it. He's got to agree to it. It can get ugly. Yeah. Like if they're just gonna cut bait and move on, they have to do that between now and June 30th. And honestly, the way he's playing right now, that contract. It'd be tough. Like, we were playing a couple of weeks ago, like, who says no?
Right.
I think there'd be a lot of no's on the other end right now. I think a lot of no's in the league would say, I'm not touching Pettersson right now. Like,
unless you're a team that is needs a jarring, needs a shakeup, right? Like it just, I don't know, and I don't want to start rumor. But
you
like
think
if
the
I'm
Buffalo
Buffalo,
Sabres
I was
want
just
to
gonna
bring
say-
Buffalo,
in?
yeah.
You
If
think
I'm
they want to
Buffalo,
bring him into the fold? Like
put
just
my
a
hand up
meek
for him.
guy that doesn't compete, and it's like that's what they need to get themselves over the hump. That
no,
would be bizarro world to make that transaction.
I'm just saying what Buffalo has right now as a group isn't working, right? So you need to shake that core up, and I don't know who that would be that would go the other way, but I'm just saying, like, if I'm an organization like that, a new, turning a new leaf over, maybe the grass is greener on the other side. Pettersson's not going to play like this the rest of his career. Like, there is going to be, like, and I don't know, recency bias. This Pierre-Luc Dubois just looks so different. Like, I look at that guy and I'm like, that's just a different player. Now, it took him 3 organizations and, less responsibility, all of that type of stuff. Like, Pettersson is a hell of a player. It's in there somewhere.
What I don't understand, Jamie, is if he's just pissy in Vancouver, why did he sign the contract? They didn't have a gun to him. They didn't say you got to sign it. Like, he had an option. He didn't have to do it.
Yeah, no, listen.
Why did he do it?
Well, 11.6 on 8. That's why you do it.
Yeah, it's a lot of money.
A boatload of money, and you can control where you're going to go after July 1st. Like, to me, he wanted to be there and probably still wants to be in that market and be a difference maker like he was 2 years ago. So I wish him the best of luck. Like, you don't want to see anybody struggle, but I watched. You can just see the aura. You can just see him struggle on the ice where you're like, that's not the Pettersson I saw 2 years ago, where he was a handful. Couldn't handle it.
Yeah, he was. And I don't know. I mean, then you also got a question like, how would he react to that? Would he be happier if he moved somewhere else? Would he be unhappy if they forced him somewhere? Like, do you think he's got Buffalo high on his list, using them as the example, or does he get there and say, really?
Yeah.
Now I'm here for 8 years or 7 years?
Listen,
I don't know. I
it.
mean,
yeah.
It's sports, though. That's it. It's a business. Like, it's a business when you negotiate and you get traded and you've got to deal with it and you got to figure it out. And I would lean towards that not happening. I think if you're Vancouver, you just got to get through this year, reset, and say, come back next year and smarten up. Probably the way it's going to play out. But it's ugly out there right now. And it's ugly for him, and they just don't have any offense. Like, you look at it with Miller out and – they're struggling to score
Besser's
goals.
a question mark too. I think his contract's up. You got to do
Besser's
something
up
with
too.
Besser.
Yeah, Besser's 27 in a UFA.
They've got big decisions to make in Vancouver still. They signed Jake DeBrusk, and DeBrusk is a nice support player there.
Played well, yeah. But that's what
goals.
he is. He's a second-line support player.
But
20 goals.
He's not the problem there. They've got to sort it out. I mean, they signed the goaltender because they can't trust. They can't trust the other guy. That's really what it is. You're trying to.
Crazy. I feel bad for Van guys. We've said it before. They've had one good year and then everything's up and like a puff of smoke. It's just an absolute circus.
Man. Miller's out. Patterson's a mess. Demko doesn't play. It's like, what are they doing? Like in 12 months.
Yeah.
This time last year,
you're like, thanks guys. Thanks for the 1 year. It's been fun.
Yeah. Like it would be like this time, although totally different scenario because Winnipeg's consistently good. But Vancouver's the best team in the league last year up until New York passed them at the end. Like next year, Hellebuck doesn't play, and they've traded Kyle Connor, and Scheifele doesn't know how to score. And you're like, what the hell happened? How could a year ago everything was breaking your way, and now a year later everything's a mess? Best bet still to come. Overdrive continues. TSN 1050 and on TSN 2. House Brothers back out in the city this week with a pair of Leaf tickets. You have to guess where he's hiding for your chance to win them. You guys ready for our first time hearing from Al's brother in a couple of weeks?
Yeah.
Ready for this? All right, let's get to it.
Hey, OD fans, we're back with a bang after the Four Nations face-off, and I got another pair of Leaf tickets to hand out here. We're giving away tickets to Leafs and Panthers on March 13th, but you got to find out where is Al's brother hiding out this week. And the area that I'm in, bit gritty, but it's got lots of charm, and it's one of Toronto's most diverse neighborhoods.
Okay, there you go. I love the animation there, man. The budget on this show through the roof. Tune in tomorrow for another clue. And the first caller through on Friday with a correct location wins a pair of tickets to see Leafs Panthers March 13th. Finals, brother, brought to you by McAlpine Ford in Aurora. Our family, the Ford family, and you. That's a big game. Noodles, you were asking earlier, when do they play Florida? I think they go play in Florida twice. I think that's what Joe from the Bridge said. And then the Panthers are up here in March. So a lot of points on the line still between the Leafs and the Lightning and the Panthers.
Yeah, you're going to control your own destiny against those teams, right? Because they're probably all going to, they're all in that 630 winning percentage range. So it really come down head to head against those teams, those 4-point games, all of that type of stuff. So, you could control your own destiny and see how it unfolds here down the stretch.
That's it. And Duthie was saying it a lot on the panel last night in terms of who the Leafs play. Points percentage very low. The quote-unquote easiest schedule in the league.
Dude,
the rest of the way.
It made me sick. I told you about one of my coach's strategies. We had 10 games left and circled every team that we should beat, and we just got pumped in every one of those games. I hate that Duthie said that.
Yeah.
Their schedule stinks coming down the stretch. As soon as he said it, I'm like, no way, man. Did not need to be said.
Well, I mean, listen, you look at this week. They're in Boston tomorrow. Ripe for the picking. Elias
I know, but it's like Boston
year.
At home against the Leafs.
I
really,
know.
It's a cakewalk for the Leafs. I don't think
Not
so.
in the Leafs. Same thing Friday. They're at the Garden playing the Rangers. Rangers aren't very good this year, but it's Friday night in New York. Anything's possible. And like Matthews and Marner played over the weekend. I would presume they play tomorrow night, but I do wonder if they're going to give them any time off. Doesn't sound like it. Again, like Berube didn't sound like he was interested in doing that, but
maybe practices or something.
Yeah, I mean, you want to give them some days off, but
of course, but it's like they're paid by the Leafs. It's like, hey, you want to go there? That's great, but when it's over, be ready to go.
Yeah. I hear you. I'm just saying, they got a buffer and they're playing well. Their goalies are healthy. I don't think you can sit both guys out the same night, but I do think it'll be an interesting conversation down the stretch. Load management with the division on the line.
Yeah.
Like if it's a 3-horse race and they're all going for it, I can tell you Florida probably would do load management. Tampa might too. The Leafs, I don't know if you can afford to because you haven't won anything yet. And I think that top seed avoiding the Panthers and or the Lightning would be massively advantageous. And I think all those three teams would be aware of that, but I don't know how you load manage if you're within striking distance of such a beneficial position. Home ice through the East until you hit Washington, if you hit Washington. And again, I think you're going to avoid the Florida teams in the first round. That's the priority. 25 games left. Do everything you can to play Ottawa or Detroit or Columbus or
something
Boston.
Different and see what happens.
You know what's scary? Again, you know who's going to get in. It's the Rangers.
Yeah, they're only 2 points out.
2 points out,
3 points out.
And they're,
but they're very inconsistent, Noodle. They got pumped on Saturday. Like I know
Buffalo.
they beat Pitt last night.
Coming out of a break, but I'm saying,
Noodles, I know you've been pumping them up, and you've been.
I'm not
been
pumping
bullish.
them up.
No, but you've been somewhat confident, and I've just gotten to the point where I've been confident in them too. I'm like, they're going to put it together, and Shesterkin's going to go nuts here. But there's just something about them where I don't have that confidence. I just don't know what it is. There's something really wrong. Yeah, like there's something really
I don't
goofy
disagree with that. Something has been off about them all year long. But, again, teams scare me. You just mentioned there's Columbus, Detroit, Ottawa. Like, those guys I put in one bucket. The Rangers I put in a separate bucket. Just like for what they did last year, for what the level of talent, it's a superstar league. They've got a few on their team. You know, you could argue like Shesterkin, Fox, and Panarin. That's a 3-pack, right? Like
Boston, the same thing. It's Swayman, McAvoy,
you're right. Like
Pasternak.
I guess my point being is like nothing is going to be. You want to give yourself the best opportunity, but nothing is going to be easy. You know, I look at it. I look at both sides. You could win the Pacific and get the Colorado Avalanche for the first round. That's where they are. They're in a wild card spot, the second spot, right? And or that could be waiting for you if you're the Winnipeg Jets or whatever. Like you could win. Like that's the scary part is Colorado hasn't had this world beater season, but man, they're going to be scary at the
Yeah.
And I look at it and I think the Rangers could be one of those teams, and I wouldn't sleep on them. Maybe I'm wrong and they just fall apart and they don't make the playoffs, but I also think that they might get their act together and be a dangerous team.
I will say I can't picture a scenario where if you're a Leaf fan, you'd prefer to play Florida or Tampa over New York at any point between now and the playoffs. Personally,
you got New York number one.
Shesterkin would scare you. I get. Well, just listen. They
past history, yes.
I think it's just past what we know.
They haven't been playing well all year. Shesterkin's worthy of doing it. A big thing we talked about it coming out of the tournament, and this year, Adam Fox has not been playing great. No. Like he has not been this dominant number one defenseman, and like Zibanejad's struggled. Trocheck's a playoff player. Like he would probably show up. Kreider would probably show up in the playoffs. But I don't know. I'm not saying they wouldn't scare me over playing Detroit or Columbus. Right. I'd prefer to play one of those two teams if I'm the Leafs compared to New York. But I'd rather play the Rangers than I would the Panthers. Or the Lightning.
Yeah, I mean, the Panthers, both those teams have won, and they know what it's like to win. You're taking
New York all day over those two teams.
Of course.
And that's why you want to get the one seed, so you can possibly be in that position.
Yeah,
and honestly, you look at Winnipeg. Winnipeg's got the best chance in anybody in the league. You finish with the top seed, and you're going to play Vancouver or Calgary. They will be a massive favorite in that series.
Massive,
massive. Right. Whoever they play there, either of those two teams, because they're going to limp in.
But you're right. But, and then this is a giant but. Winnipeg hasn't had a lot of success lately in the playoffs.
Valid.
And you look at that Vancouver team and you're like, oh, well, maybe what if Demko does come back? What if Pettersson all of a sudden looks different? Like, I don't know. And again, this is why we play the games. And I'm just saying the what if, the contrarian,
contrarian I hear you, but
thought process here. They're going to be massive favorites. But as we know in the playoffs, sometimes it just looks different. And Winnipeg still has lots to prove here. Like, you and I have been on them for 5 years. And they've got a lot to prove here in the playoffs for me because, I had higher expectations and, I picked them again this year to go deep into the playoffs and who knows, you cheer for teams, but in the end, they've got to do it, right?
For sure. Listen, that is a reality. But again, if like Vancouver gets in, let's say it's Vancouver and they have 92 points and Lankinen's playing in net and Pettersson's still moping around.
Yeah, well,
if you can't beat them, then you got to you might have to throw everything out in Winnipeg, or at least completely readjust who you are and what you're doing to an extent.
You're
you
right.
You have to win that series. You have to if you're Winnipeg. All right, best bet still to come. We got games in the NHL and NBA tonight. And tomorrow the Leafs are in Boston, and the Raptors are at home against the Celtics. So it's a Boston-Toronto night tomorrow. So we look forward to that. Tomorrow's going to be a fun show. Overdrive continues. TSN 1050 and on TSN 2. All right, today's Best Bets are powered by FanDuel. Make your picks and assemble a same-game parlay in seconds on the FanDuel Sportsbook app. Only a couple of games in the NHL. Winnipeg at home to San Jose tonight. Sharks by 2+. The puck line, they're minus 500 to win the game outright. The Jets have won 9 in a row. The Sharks, they're tanking. They're young. They're getting rid of everyone. I mean, it's all about the future and the youth movement there. I think Winnipeg wins big tonight. I'll take the Jets to be up by at least one after the first period as well. That parlay paying plus 130. Today's Best Bets powered by FanDuel. Live same-game parlays are now available for every NHL game on the FanDuel Sportsbook app. Please play responsibly, 18+, physically located in Ontario. Again, Winnipeg could go for 10 in a row. Well, they are going for 10 in a row tonight.
Started the season 15-0.
Yeah, 15-1 to start, and now this could be that could be 25-1 to like at different portions of the season, which is incredible. Yeah. And Winnipeg's on their heels, man. Washington is right there. Washington and Winnipeg are fighting it out for the President's Trophy.
Crazy.
Yeah. Pretty incredible when you think about it.
Well, which one is, in your opinion, is the bigger surprise?
Washington
all day. Last year I thought they'd be junk, and this year I thought they'd be even worse.
Every trade or acquisition they made hit.
Yeah.
Hits. Mangiapane, Duhaime, PLD, Logan Thompson.
Chikrin's been great down there.
Unbelievable.
Yep.
Unbelievable.
Across the board. Got the right coach, too. Carver's done a great job, everything.
Yes, yeah.
All right. Thanks to everyone behind the scenes for helping out. We appreciate it. Everyone for tuning in today. TV, radio, podcast, web. We appreciate that. We're out of here. Enjoy your evenings. Enjoy the games tonight. We're back tomorrow at
Jordan Bennington. I salute you, my man.
All right, thanks, guys. Hayes is a fraud.
4 p.m.?
We'll chat then.